Hello and welcome aboard, cadets, to more BattleTech lore. I'm your host, Captain Kibbs, and today we will be going over the prelude to the First Succession War. BattleTech, The Coming Storm. Yes, I am making these chapters up to help illustrate what each segment of the lore represents. Who would have thought that a freak accident which killed the First Lord would set in motion the cataclysmic wars that would ravage the sphere for centuries to come? In the year 2751, First Lord of the Star League, Simon Cameron of House Cameron, died. Our lad Simon, while touring the fringes of the sphere in a show of solidarity with some of the major states within the Star League, thought to himself, "Hey, I learned how to pilot mechs at a young age. Let me take a crack at that industrial mech deep inside of an asteroid in the void of space." To our poor boy Cameron's surprise, he would find himself in the vacuum of space, dying along with 9 other poor chaps. His final thoughts were probably, where did I go wrong? Or perhaps I should have just left it to the professionals. It is a shame for our poor boy Cameron that he died at a rather inopportune time. Commander Kerensky would be named Protector of the Realm following James's untimely demise. For you see, James Cameron had a son who was not of age to rule all of mankind yet. However, the many High Lords would seek to rule in his stead, which is why when a country bumpkin-looking fool named Stefan Ameris of the Rimworld's Republic, a lord of a loyal periphery state, or so it would so often proclaim, would not be suspicious when he made his way towards Terra. When Ameris arrived at the court, he sought out the young Cameron, presenting him with a most astonishing gift, a hollow book detailing chivalric knights and tales of honor and glory, as if by some means this book was tailored to what the young Cameron adored most. For you see, Cameron was raised being told tales of his lineage, a proud and noble history, all the while his parents having yet to tell him of the darker failings of the lineage. Simon believing he could tell his son when he came of age of the darker times. However, with Simon removed from Richard's life, Richard would now grow up believing the Camerons were near flawless. And so it was that these tales would infatuate the young Cameron, and Ameris would very quickly become the boy's only friend. For you see, Ameris was not a pure soul. His intentions far sinister than anyone may possibly yet believe, and as time passed by, his grip over the boy's mind strengthened with each passing day. It was too late when the High Lords finally saw the boy, his mind poisoned, arrogant, and twisted. Cameron would be a puppet of Ameris, making his influence over the Star League near absolute. Upon Richard's 18th birthday, his first act of First Lord of the Star League was Executive Order 156, which commanded the disbandment of all Great House armies as well as private military forces. While the commanding general would receive this order and would try to dissuade the boy from this action, Richard, now believing his order to be absolute, gave the order, ignoring Commander General's advice, adhering to the dark whispers of Stefan Ameris instead. Upon receiving news of Order 156, the High Council declared an emergency meeting. The outrage of the order stripping their power was made heard to the First Lord. During this meeting, Commander Kerensky would side with the Council, declaring that the order was a violation of their rights as states under the Star League, which swore that each state would maintain some level of self-autonomy, while Ameris would support the First Lord, thus creating an ever-growing rift between Commander Kerensky and Richard. Richard, seeing this betrayal by a supposed ally and friend, would never again trust Kerensky. This would finally alienate the last of Richard's allies, leaving him alone with Ameris as his only friend and political ally. With Ameris' influence now absolute, he would encourage Richard to pass an extremely burdening taxation edict on the periphery states of the Star League, already driving their growing animosity towards the Star League yet further. He would also order General Kerensky to enforce the edict, as many of the periphery states would begin to rebel, claiming that the already overbearing taxation edict was bringing their states to ruin. With Kerensky and a large portion of SLDF forces removed from the Terran hegemony, leaving it vulnerable, Ameris would suggest that his forces of the Rimworld's Republic safeguard the hegemony, stating that the houses were vultures waiting for the opportunity to pick apart the hegemony. Richard would agree to this, and would forever seal the fate of the Terran hegemony, and even that of the Star League. BattleTech, The Betrayal. In late December, Ameris had a 9 o'clock appointment with our First Lord Richard Cameron, accompanied by 4 fairly armed bodyguards who were allowed past the most extensive palace security systems and some of the most well-trained palace guards in all the sphere. Ameris would find Lord Cameron excitedly awaiting his longtime friend and staunch ally. After exchanging warm greetings, Ameris presented him a gift. The First Lord happily accepted the wrapped box from his friend. After tearing through several layers of boxes and exchanging laughter was pleasantly surprised as the box grew smaller and smaller. Richard finally opened the final layer to reveal a jewel-encrusted laser pistol crested with Ameris' family seal. Stefan asked to have the pistol from Richard, whom Richard gave it up to happily, thanking Ameris for the gift. Stefan beckoned the boy into the light of the private chamber, holding the pistol towards the light, rotating it so Richard could see the elegant craftsmanship on the pistol. Stefan Ameris then lowered the pistol, pointing towards Richard Cameron's head, then fired. The First Lord of the Star League was dead. The palace security systems picked up the weapon's fire, alerting the palace guards and Richard's personal forces, the Royal Black Watch. Palace guards began to charge towards the private chamber, desperate to reach their Lord Richard Cameron. To their horror, the very defense turrets that were designed to aid them in the defense of the First Lord began to shred them into pieces as the laser turrets fired upon the palace guards, cutting them down as they tried to break into the chamber. However, the battle for the heart of the Star League isn't over yet. A platoon of palace guards had equipped themselves with jump jets and were making their way, jumping building to building, desperately trying to reach the ceiling of the private chamber where they believed the First Lord could still yet be. Jumping low as to not be cut down as some of their former comrades had been by the anti-air defense systems now hijacked by Ameris' forces, who had seized the controls in the private chamber to the palace defense grid. Similarly, 2 lances of Black Watch mechs had survived the treachery along with a company of Black Watch soldiers and entrenched themselves into a nearby woodland. Dragoon forces of the Rimworld's Republic attempted to break them from their positions, and after failing and losing 10 mechs to break them, and fearing that the elite Black Watch forces could break through to help relieve palace guards who were beset on all sides, the Republic forces deployed nuclear weapons, obliterating Black Watch positions and wiping them from the face of the earth in atomic fire. The Dragoon commander then reinforced the palace, finishing off the remaining royal guards who put up an admirable fight before being overwhelmed by superior enemy forces. Throughout the Terran hegemony, Ameris' treachery was felt. Hegemony forces were betrayed, and an acts of cataclysmic drama would ensue. Those who were able to fend off the treachery were later destroyed by the use of atomic weapons. Ameris' forces of the Rimworld's Republic would show no mercy for the citizens of the hegemony either. Some loyalist forces would attempt to hold out in Fortress Brian's, immense fortifications layered and running deep underground. However, even these would succumb to repeated assaults through the years of the Ameris Civil War. Those that did not fall conventionally were repeatedly bombed by dozens of nuclear weapons, laying waste to the fortresses and irradiating entire worlds. Ameris, upon seizing control of the HPG Center, sent out a broadcast throughout the now isolated hegemony, declaring he would murder the First Lord if they did not lay down their arms. Those who foolishly did were cut down without mercy, and in a single day, 95 of 103 hegemony worlds were now under control of Ameris' forces. The hegemony was in its final death throes, and the fate of the Star League lay on the knife's edge. Upon this declaration, Ameris would now round up the remnants of House Cameron. Even those with the thinnest of the bloodline were gathered into the throne room. He asked them to submit to him. The first 20 refused to bow before this monster. They were cut down with the very pistol that had slain Richard. The 21st Cameron would bow. Ameris smiled, then cut him down as well. Upon this horrific act of cruelty, the remaining Camerons, elders, and even children would charge the throne where Ameris sat. They were cut down by his guards. They fired into the unarmed Camerons. As they lay, smoldering corpses, Ameris ordered the throne room sealed, and that any vestiges of the Camerons or that of the Star League to be destroyed, to their very memory erased, his family crest to replace those of the Camerons throughout the hegemony. BattleTech, the Ameris Civil War. Come on, you guys. You saw this coming a mile away. Stefan Ameris, upon completing his longest desire to see the Cameron house destroyed and the Terran hegemony in ruins, would now begin the final phase of his plan. He ordered Alexander Kerensky to maintain his current orders to suppress the other periphery states and accept his rulership, believing that with Terra and the entire hegemony now under his control, that even the mighty houses wouldn't support Kerensky if he dared to oppose him, and that he would have but no choice but to bend the knee to the newly anointed Emperor Ameris of the Ameris Empire. That's not ominous or anything. Unsurprisingly, Kerensky, after 3 days of silence, would reply, telling Ameris to stuff it. Kerensky, while having no base of operations, would finish off the Astrian Conclave, then quickly turn his attention towards the Rimworld Republic itself, launching a bitter campaign to seize and subdue Ameris' home space. Upon completion of this task, and having a base of operations to which to launch an attack to reclaim hegemony space, Kerensky began the long, bitter campaign to reclaim the hegemony from the vice grip of the Emperor Ameris. The campaign was long and bloody. Many of the worlds that were liberated were discovered in horrifying conditions. Genocide against the citizens of the hegemony had taken place, starvation, mass execution, and forced labor camps. The mass graves shocked the SLDF troopers. However, this only emboldened their will to see the hegemony freed from the evil Ameris Empire. The war would finally come to an end when the Rimworld Bastion on Terra would finally surrender to Kerensky's forces. Commander Kerensky would knock down the gates to Unity City, taking Ameris prisoner, thusly concluding the Ameris Civil War. Stefan and his accomplices, despite their atrocities, were held humanely until all evidence was gathered and they were sentenced to death by firing squad. And through vigilantism, the remainder of the house would disappear, just like he had done to the Camerons. The Rimworld's Republic would fall to the Lyran Commonwealth with no suitable heir to take the throne, and the remaining worlds would break away into small feudal bandit kingdoms. And though Kerensky saved the Terran hegemony and the Star League from total destruction, with no suitable heir or strong claimant to the throne of the First Lord and that of the Terran hegemony's directorate, the High Council began to covet the possibility of seizing the thrones for themselves. They would also strip Kerensky of his title as protector of the realm, as to move him away from any possible influence he might have, despite having rejected seizing the throne for himself, or to support any of the major houses for the First Lordship. The High Council, after dismissing Kerensky, began to bicker and could only come to agree upon one thing. That was promoting Jerome Blake to Minister of Communications, charged with rebuilding the Terran hegemony from its war-battered state. Some of the major houses would actually begin to finally lend more humanitarian aid to the suffering peoples of the hegemony, though throughout the conflict they subtly and discreetly began to support Kerensky's reclamation efforts by supplying him with munitions, medical, and food supplies. They had also been secretly installing their own administrations in the newly liberated hegemony worlds, recovering from the reign of the Ameris Empire, spreading their influence into the battered hegemony. On the 12th of August 2781, the House Lords dissolved the High Council after 10 months of deliberations as to whom would reign over the new Star League. Diplomacy was beginning to finally fail, and the centuries-old Star League's cracks began to spread. Kerensky, still believing that the Star League could be saved and peace throughout the sphere maintained, would shuttle across the many states for years, trying to bring them back to the talking table. Though each would hear the Savior speak, none would agree to allow diplomacy take root, even trying to persuade him to bring the SLDF to support their house and their claim to the First Lordship. Kerensky would respectfully refuse each of the High Lords' offers. And so, the vultures began to tear at the husk of the SLDF, each attempting to entice entire divisions to join the armies of the House Lords in preparation to seize the First Lordship through military means. Eventually succeeding in their enticement attempts on an entire heavy assault regiment to join the armies of House Davion, Kerensky had to act before the SLDF would be torn apart, joining the many houses and starting off a war of succession. Kerensky was forced to accelerate Operation Exodus, taking 80% of SLDF forces, families, weapons, and as much technology as possible, leaving the inner sphere in an attempt to force the houses to approach the diplomatic table once more. And as recession turned to depression, hegemony worlds and population began to leave for the great houses. Slowly, Jerome Blake watched as the hegemony grew smaller and smaller, the efforts by the houses to influence the battered state territories finally giving way to vast territories leaving the hegemony. The remaining 20% of SLDF forces would stay behind to defend what would later become Comstar out of the shattered husk of the Terran hegemony. The Star League and the era that brought about a golden age for mankind was over. And though it was never a truly peaceful era, the events that which will follow will seek to undo all that which the Star League strived for. This concludes the prelude to the First Succession War. Next up, we will go through a multi-part series in depth through the First, Second, Third, and Fourth Succession Wars. This is your host, Captain Gibbs. I hope you enjoyed today's lore. Have a glorious day.